Christmas had always been my favorite time of year, but this one was especially important. It was the first time I would be hosting Christmas for my husband's entire family. His parents were coming down from Boston, his sister Sarah was driving in from Vermont with her 2 kids, and his brother Mark would be there with his wife Jessica. I'd been planning this for months, wanting everything to be perfect. I started preparing 3 weeks early. The house got a deep clean from top to bottom. I repainted the guest bathroom and bought new towels that matched the holiday theme. Every room had some touch of Christmas. Garland on the mantelpiece, candles that smelled like pine and cinnamon, little decorative trees scattered around the living room. I even hung mistletoe in the doorway between the kitchen and dining room, thinking it would be cute. The menu took me days to plan. Traditional turkey with all the fixings, but I also wanted to add my own touches. Cranberry sauce made from scratch, sweet potato casserole with the marshmallows on top that his mom always made, and my grandmother's recipe for apple pie. I practiced making the gravy twice because I'd never cooked for this many people before. My husband Tom just laughed when he saw me writing everything down in a notebook, timing out when each dish needed to go in the oven. That morning, snow had been falling since dawn. It was the kind of Christmas snow you see in movies, big, soft flakes that stuck to the windows and made everything look magical. I was up at 6, checking on the turkey, making sure the dining room table looked right. I'd bought new dishes for the occasion, white plates with gold trim that I found on sale at Macy's. The tablecloth was deep red, and I'd scattered some pine cones and little gold ornaments down the center as a centerpiece. Tom was still in bed when people started arriving around noon. His parents came first, his dad carrying a bottle of wine, and his mom with a covered dish that turned out to be her famous green bean casserole. She hugged me tight and said the house looked beautiful, which made all those weeks of preparation feel worth it. Sarah showed up next with her kids, who immediately ran to the Christmas tree to see what presents were underneath. I was in the kitchen, basting the turkey for what felt like the 100th time, when Mark and Jessica arrived. I could hear them in the living room, Mark's loud voice carrying over everyone else's as he told some story about traffic on I-95. Jessica was quieter, but she laughed at all his jokes. They seemed happy together, which made me think about how lucky we all were to have found good people to spend our lives with. The turkey was taking longer than I expected, and I was starting to worry about timing everything right. I kept checking the thermometer, running back and forth between the kitchen and the dining room to make sure the rolls weren't getting cold. Tom finally came downstairs around 1, looking relaxed in his Christmas sweater, and started pouring drinks for everyone. I needed some extra sage for the stuffing, so I stepped into the pantry where I kept all my spices organized in little glass jars. That's when I heard them talking in the hallway, their voices carrying through the thin walls of our old colonial house. I wasn't trying to listen, but Mark's voice was always loud, especially after he'd had a drink or two. "He should leave that woman before they have kids," Mark said, and I froze with the sage jar in my hand. There was a pause, and then I heard Tom's voice, quieter but clear enough. "Don't worry, after she buys our new car." I stood there in the dark pantry, holding that little jar of sage, feeling like the air had been sucked out of the room. The turkey timer was going off in the kitchen. People were laughing in the living room, and Christmas music was playing softly from the radio on the counter. But all I could hear were those words, playing over and over in my head like a broken record. I took a deep breath and grabbed the sage, walking back into the bright kitchen like nothing had happened. The turkey timer was still beeping, so I turned it off and opened the oven door. The bird looked perfect, golden brown with crispy skin, exactly like the picture in the cookbook I'd been following. I basted it one more time, my hands steady even though my heart was racing. "Need any help in there?" Tom called from the living room, and I called back that everything was under control. My voice sounded normal, cheerful even. I surprised myself with how easily the mask slipped into place. For the rest of the afternoon, I played the perfect hostess. I carved the turkey at the table while everyone watched, served each dish with a smile, and kept everyone's wine glasses full. When Mark complimented the stuffing, I thanked him warmly and asked about his new job. When Jessica mentioned how beautiful the house looked, I told her about finding the decorations on sale and how much fun it had been to put everything together. I sat at the head of the table, right across from Tom, and watched him laugh at his father's stories about their old neighborhood in Southie. He looked so relaxed, so happy to have his family around. Every now and then he'd catch my eye and smile, and I'd smile back automatically. It felt like I was watching myself from somewhere else in the room, seeing this woman who looked just like me playing a part in someone else's life. The kids wanted to open presents after dinner, so we all moved to the living room. I sat on the floor next to the tree, handing out gifts and taking pictures with my phone. Sarah's youngest, Emma, crawled into my lap to show me her new doll, and I hugged her close, breathing in that little kid smell of shampoo and candy canes. For a moment, I almost forgot what I'd heard. Almost. But then Mark made some joke about Tom being whipped and everyone laughed, and I found myself laughing too, even though the sound felt hollow in my chest. Tom reached over and squeezed my hand, and I squeezed back, but his touch felt different now. Foreign, almost. After everyone left, we spent an hour cleaning up. Tom loaded the dishwasher while I put away leftovers, wrapping plate after plate in aluminum foil. We worked quietly, both of us tired from the day. He kept yawning and saying how well everything had gone, how much his family loved me, how proud he was of how I'd handled everything. "Your mom really liked the apple pie," I said, sealing up the last container of turkey. "She asked for the recipe." "She always does that," Tom laughed. "She never actually makes anything from the recipes people give her, but she likes to collect them." We finished cleaning and went upstairs. I took a long shower, letting the hot water wash away the smell of turkey and sage and wine. When I came out of the bathroom, Tom was already in bed, scrolling through his phone. He looked up and smiled at me, patting the space next to him. "Come here, Mrs. Perfect Hostess," he said, and normally I would have laughed and snuggled up next to him. Instead, I climbed into bed and turned on my side, facing away from him. "Long day," I said, which was true enough. He wrapped his arm around me from behind and I let him, but I didn't relax into it the way I usually did. After a few minutes, his breathing got deep and regular, and I knew he was asleep. I lay there in the dark, staring at the digital clock on the nightstand, watching the numbers change. 12:47, 12:48, 12:49. I kept replaying those words in my head, trying to make them mean something different. Maybe Mark had been talking about someone else. Maybe Tom had been joking or being sarcastic or defending me in some way I hadn't understood. But no matter how I twisted it around, it came back to the same thing. They were talking about me, about leaving me, about using me first. The car. We'd been talking about buying a new car for months. Tom's Honda was 12 years old and starting to have problems, and my savings account had enough for a decent down payment. We'd looked at a few different models, settled on a blue Camry at the Toyota dealership in town. Tom was excited about it, more excited than I'd seen him about anything in a long time. Now I understood why. The next few weeks passed in a strange, suspended way, like I was living underwater. Everything looked the same from the outside. We went to work, came home, watched TV together on the couch, went to bed at the same time. But I was watching everything differently now, paying attention to things I'd never noticed before. Tom had always been a little impatient, but now I saw how he'd sigh when I talked about my day at the insurance office. How he'd look past me when I was speaking, like he was waiting for me to finish so he could get back to whatever he was doing. I tested it one evening, telling him about a complicated claim I'd been working on, and watched as his eyes glazed over within 30 seconds. "That's interesting, babe," he said, but he was already reaching for the remote. I started asking different questions. Casual things, slipped into normal conversation. What did he see for us 5 years from now? Did he ever think about having kids? When he pictured our future, what did it look like? His answers were always vague. "We'll figure it out. Let's see what happens." "Why are you so worried about the future all the time?" That last one stung because I'd never been someone who worried about the future. I'd always been pretty go with the flow, trusting that things would work out. But now I was starting to see the difference between trusting the future and being kept in the dark about it. The car conversations got more frequent. Tom started bringing home brochures from different dealerships, spreading them out on the kitchen table after dinner. He'd gotten excited about a newer model, something with more features than the Camry we'd originally planned on. More expensive, too. "It's only $50 more a month," he said, showing me pictures on his laptop. "And look at this sound system, and heated seats." I found myself hesitating in ways I never had before. "Maybe we should stick with the original plan," I said. "The Camry is reliable." "Come on, don't be boring," he laughed. but there was an edge to it. "We can afford it. You've got that savings account just sitting there." My savings account, not our savings account. I'd been putting money away for 3 years, ever since I got promoted to senior claims adjuster. $25,000 that I'd been thinking of as our emergency fund, our house down payment fund, our future together fund. Now I wondered if he'd ever seen it that way. I started paying attention to how he talked about money, about plans, about us. He'd say things like, "when you buy the car," instead of, "when we buy the car." Little slips that I'd never caught before, or maybe had caught but dismissed. Now they felt significant. One Saturday morning, we went to look at the upgraded model he'd been pushing for. The salesman was enthusiastic, showing us all the features, talking about financing options. Tom was in his element, asking technical questions, taking pictures with his phone to show his coworkers later. I sat in the passenger seat, running my hands over the leather interior, and felt like I was in someone else's life. "What do you think?" the salesman asked me directly. "Pretty nice, right?" I looked at Tom, who was grinning at me expectantly. "It's very nice," I said, "but I think we need to talk about it more." Tom's smile faltered just a little. "What's to talk about?" "It's perfect." On the drive home in his old Honda, he was quiet for the first time all day. Finally, he said, "You've been acting weird lately, ever since Christmas. What's going on?" I could have told him then. Could have said I heard what he said to his brother. Could have confronted him directly. Instead, I said, "I'm just trying to be careful with money. This is a big purchase. It's not like we can't afford it," he said. And again I noticed the way he said it. We. But when it came to actually paying, it was always my savings account, my credit score, my financial responsibility. That night, I found myself looking through old photos on my phone. Pictures from when we first started dating 3 years ago, from our wedding last spring, from holidays and vacations and ordinary Tuesday nights. I kept looking for the moment when I'd stopped being a person to him and become a resource. But it was impossible to pinpoint, like trying to figure out exactly when day turns into night. I called my sister Amy the next morning while Tom was at his weekly basketball game. I hadn't talked to her much since Christmas, partly because I'd been busy with work and partly because I wasn't sure what to say. "How's married life?" she asked, the way she always did. "Fine," I said automatically, then paused. "Actually, can I ask you something? When you and Mike were planning your wedding, did he ever make you feel like you were paying for everything?" There was a long silence. "Why are you asking?" I couldn't bring myself to tell her about Christmas, about what I'd heard. Instead, I said, "Just wondering. Sometimes I feel like I'm the only one making financial decisions around here." "That doesn't sound like you," Amy said carefully. "You've never been someone who keeps track of who pays for what." She was right. I hadn't been that person, but maybe I should have been. It was a Tuesday in February when we finally went back to the dealership. The weather had been terrible for weeks. That kind of late winter dreariness where the snow is dirty and half melted and everything looks gray. Tom had been bringing up the car every few days, getting more insistent each time. He'd found financing deals online, calculated monthly payments, even called his insurance company to get a quote. "We're losing money by waiting," he said over breakfast that morning. "Interest rates are going up." And my car made that noise again yesterday. I'd heard the noise too, a grinding sound when he turned left into our driveway. His Honda really was on its last legs. But something in me kept resisting, kept finding reasons to delay. Maybe it was intuition, or maybe I was just finally learning to trust the uncomfortable feeling in my stomach that had been growing since Christmas. The dealership was busy for a Tuesday afternoon. Families wandering around the lot, couples arguing quietly about monthly payments, salespeople in cheap suits hovering around anyone who looked serious about buying. Our salesman, Dave, recognized us immediately and walked over with a big smile. "Back for the Camry," he said, shaking Tom's hand. "I was hoping you'd come in before we moved it to another lot. This one's been popular." Tom lit up in a way I rarely saw anymore. He started asking questions about the warranty, the maintenance schedule, whether they could throw in the extended protection plan. Dave answered everything enthusiastically, walking us around the car, popping the hood, showing off the trunk space. I followed behind them, nodding when they looked at me, but feeling more and more like I was watching a play I hadn't auditioned for. In the finance office, Dave spread out all the paperwork. Tom signed his name with a flourish, joking with Dave about finally getting rid of his old beater. When Dave slid the papers across to me, I stared at them for a long moment. My signature next to Tom's, my credit score backing up the loan, my savings account providing the down payment. "Just need you to sign here and here," Dave said, pointing with his pen, "and we'll need a check for the down payment." I signed. I wrote the check, but my hand felt disconnected from my brain, like I was watching someone else do it. Tom was practically vibrating with excitement, already talking about driving it to work tomorrow, about the road trip we could take this summer. "Where should we go?" he asked as we walked to the new car. "Maybe down to the Outer Banks? Or we could drive up to Maine, see the lighthouses." I unlocked the doors with the key fob, and we both got in. The car still had that new car smell, all leather and plastic and possibility. Tom immediately started adjusting the seat, programming the radio, playing with the GPS system. I sat in the passenger seat and watched him, and for the first time in weeks I let myself really look at him. He was handsome in an ordinary way, brown hair that was starting to thin a little at the crown, green eyes, the kind of smile that had made me fall for him at my friend Lisa's barbecue 3 years ago. He'd been funny that day, charming, interested in what I had to say. When had that changed? When had I become background noise in his life? The drive home should have been exciting. We were in our new car, making the first of what would hopefully be many trips together. But I found myself staring out the passenger window, watching the familiar streets of our neighborhood slide by, and all I could think about was that conversation in the hallway. After she buys our new car, Tom was talking about the sound system, about how clear the music sounded compared to his old car. He reached over and took my hand, squeezing it while he drove. "Thank you," he said. "I know this was a big expense. I really appreciate it." I squeezed back automatically, but the words felt hollow. Appreciate it. Not appreciate me. That's when I started crying. Not dramatic sobbing, just tears sliding silently down my cheeks. I turned toward the window so Tom wouldn't see, but he must have noticed something because he glanced over and his whole demeanor changed. "What's wrong now?" he said. And there was that word again. Now. Like my emotions were an inconvenience he had to deal with. "Now?" I repeated, turning to look at him. "What do you mean now?" He sighed, the way he always did when he thought I was being difficult. "You've been weird for weeks. Moody. I thought getting the car would cheer you up, but here you are crying for no reason." "No reason," I said quietly. "Yeah, no reason. We just bought a beautiful new car. We should be celebrating." We were stopped at a red light, and I looked at him sitting there in the driver's seat of the car I'd just paid for, looking annoyed that I wasn't performing happiness the way he expected me to. That's when I decided to tell him. "I heard you talking to Mark on Christmas," I said. The light turned green, but Tom didn't move for a second. Then he drove forward, not looking at me. "What are you talking about?" "In the hallway. He said you should leave me before we have kids. You said not to worry, that you'd do it after I bought your new car." Tom's hands tightened on the steering wheel. We drove in silence for a full minute before he said, "You misunderstood. I misunderstood he should leave that woman before they have kids?" Mark was drunk. He was talking about his friend Steve, not me. "And when you said after she buys our new car?" Another long pause. "I was being sarcastic, defending you." I looked at his profile as he drove, the way his jaw was set, the way he wouldn't meet my eyes. "Say it again," I said. "Say what?" "Say after she buys our new car. Say it the way you said it on Christmas." He pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine. We sat there in our brand new car, in the silence that followed, and I watched as his face slowly changed. Not to guilt or shame or regret, to calculation, like he was trying to figure out his next move. That night, Tom tried everything. First, he denied it again, insisting I'd misheard, that I was being paranoid. When that didn't work, he got angry, asking why I'd been eavesdropping, why I couldn't just let it go. Then came the explanations. Mark had been giving him a hard time about being married. He was just trying to get his brother off his back. It didn't mean anything. "You know I love you," he said, sitting on the edge of our bed while I folded laundry. "We just bought a car together. Would I do that if I was planning to leave?" I held up one of his t-shirts, crisp from the dryer, and looked at him through it. "You didn't buy a car. I bought a car. It's our car. Your name is on the title, my money paid for it. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I used to find endearing. This is crazy. You're making this into something it's not. Mark was just being Mark. You know how he is. And I was just trying to shut him up. But I'd heard the tone in his voice that day. I'd replayed it in my head 1,000 times. There was no defending me in that hallway conversation. There was only patience. Waiting. A plan. I didn't sleep that night. I lay next to Tom, listening to him breathe, and made lists in my head. What was mine? What was his? What we'd bought together. The house was in both our names, but I'd put down the larger down payment. Most of the furniture was mine from before we got married. The savings account that had just bought his car was entirely mine. In the morning, I called in sick to work. Tom left for his job at the engineering firm like it was any other day, kissing me goodbye, telling me to feel better. After his car pulled out of the driveway, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of coffee and started making real lists. My sister Amy answered on the second ring. Hey, what's up? You never call during work hours. Can I come stay with you for a while? I asked. There was a long pause. What happened? I told her everything. Christmas, the car, the conversation last night. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a moment. How long have you been thinking about this? She asked. Since Christmas. But really thinking about it? Since yesterday. Good, she said firmly. Pack a bag. I'll be there in 2 hours. I'd expected her to tell me to slow down, to think it through, to maybe try counseling first. Instead, she said, I never liked him anyway. Too charming. Always made me feel like he was performing. I packed one suitcase with clothes and basic necessities. I took my grandmother's jewelry from the bedroom safe, my laptop, and the photo albums from before Tom and I met. I left most of my books, all the kitchen appliances I'd slowly collected, the Christmas decorations I'd so carefully chosen. They felt like props from someone else's life now. The hardest part was writing the note. I sat at the kitchen table for an hour, starting and stopping, trying to find words that felt true. Finally, I kept it simple. Tom, I'm staying at Amy's for a while. We need some space to figure things out. The car keys are on the counter. Don't call me for a few days, I need time to think. I left it propped against the coffee maker. Somewhere he'd definitely see it. Then I took the car keys for the Camry, my Camry, and set them next to the note. I didn't need a car to prove my worth to anyone. I could buy my own car when I was ready. Amy arrived with red eyes and a thermos of coffee. She hugged me tight in the driveway, and I finally let myself cry properly. Not the silent tears from yesterday, but big, shoulder-shaking sobs that felt like they'd been building up for months. I feel so stupid, I said into her shoulder. You're not stupid. You're trusting. There's a difference. We loaded my suitcase into her car, and I took one last look at the house. I'd loved that little colonial with its thin walls and creaky floors. I'd pictured us growing old there, maybe raising kids, hosting more Christmas dinners. Now it just looked like a stage set for a play that was ending. Tom called that evening, just as Amy was setting the table for dinner. I let it go to voicemail. He called again an hour later, then again at 10. I turned my phone off. The next morning, there were 12 missed calls and 7 text messages. The text started apologetic and got progressively more frustrated. We need to talk about this. You're overreacting. Come home so we can work this out. The last one, sent at 2 a.m., just said, This is ridiculous. I drove to work in Amy's car. She'd insisted I borrow it, and tried to act normal. My coworker Janet noticed I seemed off and asked if everything was okay. I told her Tom and I were having some problems, which felt like the understatement of the year. Marriage is hard, she said sympathetically. Mike and I went through a rough patch around year 2. Counseling really helped. I nodded and smiled, but I couldn't imagine sitting in a therapist's office with Tom, pretending we both wanted the same things. How do you counsel someone out of seeing you as a transaction? That afternoon, I called a lawyer. Not to file for divorce, not yet, but to understand my options. What was mine? What was his? What happened to joint assets when one person had contributed significantly more money? Massachusetts is an equitable distribution state, the lawyer explained. That means assets are divided fairly, not necessarily equally. Documentation of individual contributions can be very important. I had documentation, bank statements, canceled checks, receipts. I'd kept everything, partly out of habit and partly because I'd always been the more organized one in our relationship. Now I was grateful for my compulsive record-keeping. By the end of the week, I knew I wasn't going back. Not to the house, not to the marriage, not to the version of myself who had smiled through Christmas dinner while her husband planned her disposal. That woman had been stronger than she knew, but she was gone now. In her place was someone harder, clearer, less willing to accept crumbs and call them love. By March, I'd found my own apartment. Nothing fancy. A one-bedroom on the second floor of a converted Victorian in Somerville, with hardwood floors and windows that let in more light than I knew what to do with. The rent was reasonable, and more importantly, it was mine. My name on the lease, my security deposit, my choice of paint colors for the walls. I chose yellow for the living room. Not the pale, careful yellow that real estate agents recommend, but actual sunshine yellow that made me smile every time I walked through the door. Amy helped me paint it on a Saturday in April, both of us covered in paint splatters, laughing at some ridiculous story she was telling about her kids. "You seem different," she said, stepping back to admire our work. Lighter. I felt lighter, like I'd been carrying around a weight I didn't even know was there. The divorce proceedings were moving forward. Tom had been shocked when I filed, apparently convinced I'd eventually come to my senses and come home. He'd offered to go to counseling, promised to change, even suggested we take a vacation to work things out. But I'd heard the calculation in his voice during those conversations too. He wanted to keep the benefits of being married to me without actually valuing me as a person. The car situation had been resolved pretty quickly. I signed the title over to him and walked away from the monthly payments. He could figure out how to afford his dream car on his own salary. I bought a used Honda Civic from a teacher at Amy's school. 7 years old, reliable, and completely mine. It wasn't fancy, but it started every morning and got me where I needed to go. Work became a refuge. I'd always been good at my job, but now I threw myself into it with new energy. I took on complicated cases, stayed late to finish projects, even volunteered to train new employees. My boss noticed and mentioned the possibility of another promotion. For the first time in years, I let myself think about career goals beyond just paying bills. I started painting again. I'd always loved it in college, but somehow it had gotten pushed aside during my marriage. There had always been Tom's hobbies to support, Tom's friends to entertain, Tom's needs to meet. Now I set up an easel in front of the big window in my living room and painted whatever I felt like painting. Terrible landscapes, abstract color studies, a series of still lifes featuring fruit from the market down the street. The paintings weren't good, but they were mine. No one was judging them or suggesting I do something more practical with my time. I painted when I felt like it, stopped when I didn't, and slowly remembered what it felt like to do something just because it brought me joy. Summer came and went. I took a vacation by myself, something I'd never done before. Just a long weekend in Portland, Maine, walking around the old port, eating lobster rolls, watching boats in the harbor. I stayed in a bed and breakfast run by an older couple who'd been married for 40 years and still seemed to genuinely enjoy each other's company. "What brings you to Portland?" the woman asked as she served me breakfast on the porch. "Just needed a change of scenery," I said, which was true enough. She nodded knowingly. Sometimes that's exactly what we need. I thought about Tom's plans for road trips in the new car, about the Maine lighthouses he'd wanted to visit together. But sitting there eating blueberry pancakes and watching the sunrise over Casco Bay, I realized I preferred this. The quiet, the freedom to wander without having to consider anyone else's preferences or timeline. Fall arrived with its usual New England drama, leaves turning red and gold, crisp air that made me want to walk everywhere instead of driving. I reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with during my marriage. Lisa, who'd introduced me to Tom at that barbecue, was surprised to hear about the divorce. "I always thought you two seemed happy," she said over coffee. "We seemed happy," I agreed. "But seeming and being are different things." She nodded thoughtfully. "I'm sorry it didn't work out." "I'm not," I said, surprising myself with how true it was. "I'm sorry it took me so long to figure out what was really going on, but I'm not sorry it's over." The holidays were approaching again. Almost a year since that Christmas dinner that had changed everything. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest as December began, but it was different this time. Not anxiety about performing or pleasing anyone, just a quiet sadness for the version of myself who had worked so hard to create a perfect holiday for people who didn't really see her. I decided to have Christmas exactly the way I wanted it. No big dinner, no guests, no pressure to create memories for other people. I bought a small tree from the lot at the grocery store and decorated it with ornaments I picked up at the dollar store. Nothing fancy, just things that made me smile. A silver star, some red glass balls, a few candy canes. On Christmas Eve, I made cookies. Not the elaborate decorated sugar cookies I'd stressed over the year before, but simple chocolate chip cookies from the recipe on the back of the bag. I made them just for me, ate them warm from the oven while I watched old movies on my laptop. The apartment was quiet in the way that used to scare me but now felt peaceful. I lit candles that smelled like cinnamon and pine, put on some soft music, and curled up on my couch with a book. Outside, snow was beginning to fall. Not the magical movie snow of the year before, but ordinary Massachusetts snow that would probably turn to slush by morning. I thought about the woman who had stood in that pantry a year ago, holding sage and heartbreak, trying to figure out how to survive the rest of the day. She'd been braver than she knew. She'd smiled through betrayal, gathered information, made plans, and found the strength to leave when she was ready. She'd chosen herself when no one else would. Now, sitting in my yellow living room with my crooked Christmas tree and my store-bought cookies, I felt something I hadn't expected. Gratitude. Not for the pain or the betrayal, but for the clarity it had given me. For the chance to build a life that was actually mine, not just a supporting role in someone else's story. My phone buzzed with a text from Amy. "Merry Christmas, sis. Proud of you." I smiled and typed back, "Merry Christmas. Thank you for everything." Then I turned off my phone, blew out the candles, and went to bed in my own apartment, in my own bed, with my own choices surrounding me like a warm blanket. For the first time in years, I fell asleep feeling completely at peace.